Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with documentary filmmaker Sinéad O'Shea about her really wonderful documentary Pray for Our Sinners, which will be in cinemas from the 21st of April. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It was lovely. I saw you very briefly at the Catalyst International Film Festival where the film screened. It's such a wallop of a documentary. Like, it just smacks you over the face with like rage. Like, I was watching it and I cried, and then was like, I had to. I was just the timing of it was so that I had to take a little break and go back, because I was like, I'll get to watch half now and half later. And then like in between that, I was sort of doing that thing where you argue in your head with yourself about all the topics that were raised in it. Like, I was actually like, I could feel my rage building. And then like, again, what came back, cried. Like, it was just, I think something you do so deeply, beautifully is take these big, huge themes about the way women, for this one it's about how women are treated in Irish society, and you make it so personal, and I think that's it. Like, you take these systemic problems and you find these women who, like, it's so hard to find people to talk about this subject matter, which is terrible, but it's like, you even discuss this in the film, which is so beautiful, and you get them to chat so honestly and openly. There's so much empathy for them, but also I think what I really love about the film is how you're in it, and how your character is there, and how you relate to the subjects, and you're not like this disembodied, like, your voice is so strong, and I really enjoyed that as well, because I kind of feel like, it's more authentic. Like, it is, you are the person talking to that, and you do see that rapport there, and how it affects you as a person, and how this big systemic problem affects like the whole nation, then down to the town of Navan, and then down to these women, and then right down to you as a documentary maker who who's kind of recording this, and that rage is there, and I think it's just so it's just such a powerful film, beautifully put together, and there's so much oomph to it. So thank you to view.
I found it quite stressful to listen to. I was just like, oh no, something bad's gonna happen. Thank you.
They're compliments.
I know. I just think like, is just my fundamental Catholicism. I just go like, please stop. This is so
and it was so long because I loved it so much. God, it's like little needles of joy with like embarrassment.
That was really stressful, but thank you. That's very kind of you. I don't know what to say, but thank you.
So it's infecting. Like, it's not just something that you kind of catch. And do you know what I think as well? And I'm totally going to kind of like go through the whole thing and nitpick everything, and pick your brain about, not nitpick, pick your brain about how you did certain things. But what I think is one of the biggest testimonies to how Ireland has changed is that this has gotten state funding.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's true. It was made under Screen Ireland's micro budget scheme. So that's a scheme where you're given 100,000 euros to make a film, which is definitely not enough money to make a feature film. But what they do, what happens is that you just get given that money, so you don't have to go out fundraising abroad or do co-productions or something. And so in this case, because some of the characters were quite old and it was in the middle of COVID, I just thought, now I have to do this right now. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But it did cross my mind how remarkable this is. And, you have to fill out an awful lot of forms to get the money. But, they were, one of the questions is like, why is this an Irish production? And, you're able to say, well, this is a story of, how church and state worked together and how oppressed people became and how people stood up and resisted again, and formed resistance. And I just was, it is an amazing thing that Screen Ireland exists now, and that there's funding for this kind of work, because a big part of the storyline is the fact that, the people who are resisting did reach out for help to the media in Ireland. And, they went to the Irish Press and the Irish Times and RTE, all the big names, and they couldn't get help anywhere. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point. We haven't really mentioned that yet, in all that we've been discussing around the film. We are really lucky to have Screen Ireland. I mean, like, no, nobody's perfect, but it is marvelous that there's a body dedicated to native filmmaking in this way.
And yet that isn't afraid to tackle subject matter that is not generous towards the Irish state. And
that's, I think, not generous, and that's not necessarily going to be commercial. We weren't thinking this could be anything other than a gathering of testimonies. And then slowly the project kind of snowballed and escalated, and found its way into big festivals abroad. But the initial instinct was, this is a really good story. It's unusual. It's showing something positive. It's showing a resistance. Let's try to capture these testimonies while we can. It really is amazing that there was funding available for that. Yeah, it's funny because a few filmmakers have come to me and said, would you recommend the micro budget scheme? And I'm just kind of going, oh, I don't know. It's so tricky, that amount of money. I don't know if I would, but for this project in this instance, it was just an absolute gift.
So tell me how, like, again, obviously you're so close to the subject matter, and I mean, it's just something that's so visceral. I think any woman in particularly that I know, there's not one woman who hasn't, even in my generation, who hasn't sort of still felt the ripples of the themes that are experienced in this, even through like the present healthcare system. I had a child in the past 2 years, and you can feel the unconsciousness of that you are like a machine that is designed to birth children in the state, and you don't fully have your own autonomy. And yes, we have changed the law quite recently, but it's not in full aspect. And when you go through the process, you do feel it. You see that repercussions there. And I'm like, so it's something I think we feel so viscerally. So I completely understand you being drawn to it as a documentary maker, but sort of why this aspect and why now as well?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a baby recently too, and just to agree with what you say, like I had hyperemesis, which is very severe morning sickness, and I had that the whole way through, until the baby was born. And that there's a medication you can get that's free everywhere else, but in Ireland you have to pay for it. I remember just thinking, like, why am I having to pay a fortune, for this? And you're absolutely right. There's lots of aspects to maternal care that's very weighed down by past practices and past ideologies, I think, as well. But anyway, for this film, I just finished making my first feature. A mother brings her son to be shot, which is, it's so funny because I'm always saying, which is, it's really like the title. It's such a literal title. And I was talking to an old school friend. I mean, I say this in the film, and it really is what happened. I was speaking to an old school friend about work she had actually been doing to get a bench erected in Navan in honor of Dr. Paddy Randalls, who had just passed away. So he was this extraordinary doctor who did so much for the people of Navan, for women and children in particular. And she said he was such a great character, and he was particularly strong when it came to corporal punishment. And she told me bits and pieces out of the story that ended up in the film. But so I thought, well, that is amazing. And he sounds like a wonderful man. But I wondered if there was enough in that for a whole feature documentary. It's a real challenge, the feature documentary format. You can make half an hour quite easily about anything, really, I think. But keep people for 80 minutes, you need a few different moving parts. So I met Dr. Mary Randalls, who is Dr. Paddy's widow, and she is even more charismatic and vivacious in real life than she is on screen. And she was a delight. And she was very keen for me to make film all about Paddy. And so she spoke to me all about his work to do with corporal punishment. And, he'd done lots of work in lots of sectors on Montessori schools, like on bringing, on changing segregated education in Northern Ireland. There were so many things she was trying to interest me in about it. But then the Mother and Baby Home report came out, and she said to me, well, I just can't believe it. She was really upset about it. She goes, and I think of all those women that we used to hide here, all those young girls. I was like, what young women? And then she very casually, after 2 years, 3 years maybe, of knowing her, reveals that, they had kept women out of mother baby homes by hiding them in their house, that they had rescued women from mother baby homes, that they'd rescued babies who'd been kidnapped from their mothers, that had been this huge part of their lives. But kind of slightly typically of Mary, she hadn't really thought this was worth mentioning, which is so in keeping with what a modest and astonishing person she is. She genuinely felt like this was just it's so funny because she's such a contradiction. She genuinely feels it's both a normal thing to do and a common sense thing to do, but also was kind of aware that nobody else was doing this. So, she's always such a funny contradiction. And then, it came tumbling out further that, she had done all this work to do with contraception, and that she had opened up the first women's health clinic and the first family planning clinic outside of Dublin. But she was just so modest and reserved. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if I went back to her and she revealed something else extraordinary that she just hadn't bothered to mention to me. But anyway, I kind of felt, okay, now we have more potential stories. And now if we could find some of the women that she encountered, we can build a wonderful film that kind of shows this whole resistance. I hope I'm not being too long with it, by the way.
No, like 2 of those women's stories, I was just like about the babies. It just got you on such a visceral level. And it's just, the church didn't expect you to put up a fight. And if they didn't have somebody fighting her corner, they were like, all right, these are easy marks. These are babies we can just take.
Yeah.
Like that, if they didn't have someone with that gravitas fighting their corner, like it's just... It shows the importance of activism and that selfless fight and using power to support somebody and the difference. And I think you say that yourself in your voiceover, like it's the people that didn't have a voice, that were vulnerable, that were sort of didn't have that network, were the people that were preyed on the most, but it's so gut-wrenching when you see like how traumatized these women.
I know it's a funny kind of conclusion because it's not a Hollywood film, so they are rescued and there are happy outcomes, but they're completely traumatized by what happened to them. So it kind of is funny. It's funny because this film has played in a lot of US festivals, and I felt I was presenting a quite positive film, as enraging and upsetting as it is. I was like, but these are people who got away, and there was an actual resistance. And there are very few stories like this at home, but all the audiences there were just kind of devastated, I suppose, by everything they saw. Whereas I think here in Ireland, it's playing in a slightly different way, in a way more closer to what I envisaged, which is that there's the trauma and the triumph simultaneously. And I think people here are able to accept that you can have both at the same time.
And we know all the bad stories. Like we're all very, very well. Like I think I was chatting to someone who was European, and they kind of have the vague, oh, I know there was a few scandals, and I'm like, oh, but you don't know. And then you just go through and I was like, this is just the highlight reel. And they're like, what? And in living memory, like so much has happened in living memory. And I think your film just highlights it. And what I love about it is it's like, even the text is angry, even though it's quite like and I'm like, yeah, it's quite like factual and pared back, but I'm like, but I can feel that rage when I'm watching it, and I'm like, yeah, because I have that rage.
Yeah, no, I wondered, is that overkill to put that text at the end? But I was just like, I have them all here now, so I might as well just say, because the rest of
But
them,
it's very factual though. It's not going like, and they're disgusting, adding that thing there. But I'm like, you're just putting up mostly facts and mostly a description of what happened and Peart Brack with very little adjectives and stuff. But it's just, I can feel it, like, and I think it's the lived experience for so many of us now.
yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, like Norman, he's this, who's gone through such hell, as a 9-year-old, but he has a teenage daughter now, so it's not that far from us, any of this. Or, the one of the babies who was rescued in the film, she came to our first Irish screening at the Dublin Film Festival. And, she's not old. She seems really young to me. And, it's just so present, I think, for everyone. And I guess that was part of the motivation for emphasizing in the text and in the voiceover, the church does control 90% of the primary and secondary schools. It's very present. They control a lot of the healthcare still. And this isn't all about the church being malevolent. This is about the state allowing them to have that control and saying, no, it's more convenient basically for us to do it that way. And we don't have the resources to manage it that way. And it's just always been this kind of, it's collaboration, I guess, collusion really between
From
church
home
and
rule
state.
to Rome rule.
Yeah, it's really bad for the people. It's really dreadful. And then, you've got thousands of people unaccounted for, whose adoption files, aren't really traceable. We just don't know how many bodies are buried on these mother and baby home sites because they still haven't been properly excavated. So it's very, very present. I have friends who are, younger than me, they're like in their early 30s and they were adopted and they don't know where they were for several months because the record keeping is so bad. It's very, very present. I just feel like that's a big emphasis in the film. And that's, I suppose, we are conscious of, there have been films on this subject matter before, but I suppose what we're trying to say, that it's different for a few reasons. One, we're emphasizing how present this is. And then secondly, we're emphasizing, I suppose, that more positive aspect, that there was a resistance. Not to keep going on, but I actually I'm quite touched by your point about, these people being alone, but then having this defender who had gravitas. And because it's interesting, when you say that the church hadn't anticipated these women standing up to them. And I just think actually one slight tragedy of what happened is that I don't think enough people did try to stand up sometimes. I think they were so convinced they were doomed to failure that they didn't even try sometimes. And I think it's quite devastating. Because essentially the church and I suppose the state, they were just bullies, I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of going off on a tangent here, but sometimes with certain kinds of bullies, all you need to do is just push back a bit and just make them question what they're doing a bit. Yeah. On the other hand, the system in Ireland, I mean, it was so difficult because, as I say at the start of the film, if you didn't have someone to back you, you were nobody. Like, there was no internet, there wasn't really travel forward and back, there weren't that many jobs. So you needed a set of alliances to be able to maintain yourself within Ireland.
And I think it's probably a hangover from our post-colonial setup as well, our mentality, where like collectively, you would get we'd be a bit cheeky to authority, but we really submissive for so long.
I don't think we're cheeky to authorities too. I just find it's a complete myth. And Irish people are always saying it about themselves and the rest of the world say it about us and we kind of giggle along and we're not. We're so totally deferential. It drives me completely bonkers. But then, I mean, I've loads of English friends who say, no, English people are even more hierarchical and even more obsessed with authority. So I don't know. But I always think anyway, it's pointless comparing ourselves to England.
To another.
Well, it's not even that. It's just that England is such a shit show. So like, who cares if we're not as dysfunctional as Brexit land? Like, who cares? That's a really small triumph. So Anyway, I just don't think we are cheeky at all.
Yeah, no, but it's in your film, and this is exactly how you've set it up. Like the hierarchical nature is how society was set up, so that, you know, people on the ground level, if they, or like, you know, one rung above, if they, you know, their voices are elevated ever so slightly, people on the ground level are not. And really it's only in that, and I thought it was so interesting that it was the UK that spoke out, and so many times as well, you know, about even about the rugby trial, about like you'd go to the British newspaper to cover things in
Yeah.
that slightly more honest way. And that hierarchical thing is still everywhere. It's in the healthcare system, it's in our policing, it's in our media, in the sense where we have libel laws now that, you know, shut people out from speaking.
Yeah,
I
no, we
mean,
have particularly strict defamation laws in Ireland. And actually, you know, it's another reason why I was so glad to be able to make this film through Screen Ireland and not through RTE, where, you know, there's such an anxiety around the defamation laws. But, you know, there were so many changes we had to make to this film to prevent any potential issues from arising. And so, you know, they were all made, but it is really, really tricky, I think, to work within this culture as a journalist or as a filmmaker, anyone who's dealing in factual matter. So it does just encourage, you know, powerful people to continue being powerful.
and protected them for so long as well. And I think people are surprised now that they're, you know, that I think people are being prosecuted. Like I'm like, it's just, I'm going to only talk about it in the context of this film, because I will just talk to you for hours about this, because it's such a, like, it's such a visceral and difficult thing, but it's a hangover of all the systems that you investigate. And I think it's one of those things, and you did speak about this, and it's so beautifully put, because I think everything you gave an example of, you showed the personal human consequence. And you have these women, you get them to speak so openly. And I think that's sort of one of the tricks that the that the church kept us quiet, even now with shame. Like shame is such a part of our society. It just keeps these women quiet. I was on a bus and I was chatting to a lady who was, I'd say, in her 80s. And we were just giving out about something, as you and I are doing now. And then she just said, "Oh, I was actually in that institution from the age of 15 until I was in my 30s." And just, she didn't want to talk about it. She just said it. There was another woman there who was like, "Ah, fuck them all." And, you know, but she was clearly religious, and that pain, and you could see it, how it washed over her body, and how that trauma is still just beneath. You scratch a tiny bit and it's just beneath that surface. And what I think you just did so beautifully is created the space for that pain to be there, which allows other people to feel that pain, which is a voice for the voiceless in so many ways. But I just, how did you sort of build the rapport enough to do that? Because it must have been very difficult.
No, I actually really can't take credit for that. I think a lot of it was to do with the fact that those women loved Mary so much. So Mary really wanted the film to be made. And so Mary had put me in touch with these women. And so, you know, once you have Mary to vouch for you, you know, that makes a huge difference. So I think that really helped, because, you know, with Betty, I really only had 2 afternoons with her. So I did the first interview with her where she spoke about the home, and then the second time I met her, we spoke about her experience of giving birth, which was utterly harrowing, like really shocking.
Because it's such
But
a horrific
it's
experience.
just unbelievable. But you can tell the pain. I suppose what I really like about seeing somebody like Betty tell that story is that she really uses so few words. And, you know, I suppose generally what I like about this film, or rather the people in the film, sorry, it sounds really immodest.
But it is a beautiful film.
No, but it contradicts what I'm about to say, which is that I love how modest they all are. Like, they're so quiet. They've gone through these extraordinary things. They've experienced such pain, and of triumph, I guess, too. And they express it all so succinctly and so gently and so quietly. And I love them so much for it. And, someone like Betty, I just think today, obviously, if anyone experienced the equivalent, I mean, that's actually fair enough. Of course, you would express that as much as you could. But I sometimes think today the level of rubbish, basically, that I read on social media about, what people think about anything, it's all so overstated and bombastic and grandiose, and everything is just so big. And yet the actual things which have happened to these people are so singular, and yet they are so gently spoken about it. It really touches me. I don't think I've described it very well, but I really love and admire them for how they express themselves. I just think it's so profound. I can't say enough how much I admire that kind of modesty.
And was it cathartic? Like, what has the response been on the ground now? Because it's screened in quite a few places.
Yeah, it's kind of mixture. As I was saying, so it screened first in Toronto, and did a very nice response there. I mean, it's funny because it's always quite hard to evaluate what is having a successful premiere in Toronto, because there are like Harry Styles and Taylor Swift on a red carpet close by, and so you're very much not of that ilk. But we had a lovely crowd there, and there were quite a few people of Native American heritage who had experienced some of the schools that the Catholics had controlled in Canada. So they spoke with me afterwards. So it was very interesting to hear that perspective. And then there were quite a few Irish Americans or Irish Canadians in the audience too. And then similarly in the US, we played quite a few festivals there. And, it's just kind of surreal to say any of these things, because this wouldn't have been the trajectory that was expected for this film really at all. It was seen as a very small film. And now we have our Irish cinema release. So we had the Dublin Film Festival first, and that was brilliant. That was a homecoming for the film, and the participants, some of them got to see it for the first time, and I'd been really anxious about them seeing it, and I had wanted them to see it with kind of the warmest audience possible. And it was beautiful. It was really great. They had like few standing ovations, and people burst into applause at one point when Mary was talking about mother and baby hugs. It was just beautiful. Betty was there with her daughter. They're saying Ethna was there. They kind of sobbed and they laughed, and everyone hugged them afterwards. So that couldn't really be bettered, I think, as an experience. And then next, very next screening is in Navan, and then London, and then we have our Dublin, Ireland
release on the 21st of April.
Exactly.
Are you nervous about the Navan?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I'd be the most, like, you could be like, oh, I'm going to Toronto and go to London. But I think I'd be the most nervous about it.
No, I always said that I'll get my comeuppance. I am. I mean, I guess there's a few reasons for it. Like, it is, as I say in the film, I don't want to get any of my family in trouble. My sister is a teacher actually in the school where Norman used to go, even though it's changed hands now. And my other sister is an occupational therapist there, and my parents live there. So I really, how how all places in Ireland work. It's the same in Dublin. It's just you just don't want to upset anybody. But then that's kind of the whole problem sometimes. We avoid saying things because we don't want to upset anybody. So yeah, I don't know how it'll go. I mean, I don't think there's going to be anything other than absolute love and compassion for the participants in the film. One of the central characters in the film is the former parish priest, Father Farrell. So I wonder how that will go, because
Will there be a few diehard things? But you
yeah,
do give a balanced view of him. Like,
yeah, he's a very interesting character. I think he's very complex, and I felt he was just such an interesting character to have in a film like this, because he really does represent the church in its entirety in a way. He does terrible things, but he also does wonderful things for the town, and he is very nuanced, and you can see why people loved him. And I completely, yeah, I really understand why people loved him.
yeah. And I do think that, like, I would have remembered like that kind of complexity, and that like it's kind of in us all. Like I think
Yeah,
I when I was younger I said, oh, I'd always raise my kids, like obviously before Kerry babies, before the Murphy report, before all these things, or before I was kind of fully aware of the extent. But you would have gone, oh, like, I mean, there are elements of it that are so nice, and it's nice to have that level of spirituality and community nurtured, and nothing has stepped in. And that's, I do think, a great disservice to society. Like, there is something missing, and like the supports for grieving, or that kind of spiritual guidance, like that isn't there.
yeah, that's so well said. I just completely agree, and I think you when you watch the film through, there's definitely a great appreciation for Catholicism there and for what it did for the community. And I feel it was really a privilege for me in some ways to grow up within that tradition. There was an awful lot of beauty to it as well. So yeah, I agree. There's comfort offered by Catholicism. There are rituals associated with it, which we've struggled to replace. And it is a very nuanced matter. I can really see why people love the religion itself still. I completely understand that.
Yeah, and it's just the systems, and how they integrated with the state. If it was sort of like, I even remember there being such generosity. Like, I would have been in school in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was a different religion. Like, it wasn't fire and brimstone. It was forgiveness in Jesus and baby Jesus. Like, it
Mm.
wasn't that sort of, and it was kind of shifting. And if it had kind of gone in that trajectory, and I often think as well, like, if there was any, this is something that you talk about, but if there was accountability and an apology and acknowledgement, and like, if it, all those things. But I think there never was, and I think that's why it's so unforgivable, where the state is, I mean, the state is responsible at the end of the day. We gave all those powers away, but like, all the victims and how they're not being compensated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the redress scheme is such a scandal. It's such a disgrace, and that's happening right now, and it's just so devastating. And I think everyone just feels paralyzed and very upset. I mean, just to briefly discuss it, under the terms of the redress scheme for the mother and baby homes survivors, um, people like Betty, who endured horrors while there, but was there for a relatively short amount of time, she's entitled to the smallest amount of compensation, which is €5,000. So
It's almost insulting. That's almost like an insulting to say that the trauma that she's endured her whole life, and that has impacted her whole family, and that she almost had her child stolen from her, and that's worth, like, that wouldn't even cover the therapy, entry level therapy.
yeah, um, it's so dreadful. And actually, again, speaking of hierarchy, the survivors, they said we don't want a scheme that's built on a kind of hierarchy of time spent in these institutions. And actually, the government did exactly what they didn't want. And so that's what they've been left with. And it's just really upsetting and sad for all the survivors. They've been encouraged to kind of divide amongst themselves, because some people are entitled to like larger sums of money, and it shouldn't be about, it just shouldn't have been divided up in those terms. And people are really rightly upset, and that's happening right now. Um, so yeah, it's not just the church that's the problem.
But I do think that's something, like, your film deals with the humanity of all this, and having it being able to view, and kind of sharing it internationally, I think is so important, because like, on home ground, it gives people a space to grieve, do you know? I'd be
Yeah.
very interested to see what the response will be of people, catching it in a cinema.
Yeah, me too. I wonder, like I must say, I mean, I'm a bit worried about the title. I think the title's a little bit off-putting for people. The title was slightly forced upon us. I just know that for Irish people, they're a bit like, oh, oh. I don't know for sure, but that would be my instinct. So I'm just really hoping there's enough good word of mouth for that kind of that sensibility to.
I mean, I could literally talk to you about the content for hours, but I have to go into the process because otherwise I'll use up all my time. Because and the pacing is just beautiful of these, like you do an incredible job of getting exposition and history in, then like explain, like you could not know anything about Ireland and watch this film, but then you have these beautiful quiet moments with just an array of different subjects, and then kind of you talk as well about the Navan as a space and a society in that time. And I'm just wondering, did this change? So you were originally documenting testimony. How did this change, like from the pitch, or was this found in the edit?
It's interesting, actually. It's actually very close to pitch that I sent to Screen Ireland. So I was always saying to them, I'm going to build it around some testimonies, and it'll also reflect my own experiences of growing up in this place. And then once we started, I just thought, actually, I really don't want to start talking too much about myself in this. And the interviews I had done, they were just so brilliant. And so I'm not saying my interview was brilliant, I'm saying the characters were so brilliant. And so I was like, okay, this is actually quite a simple structure now because they're all retrospective. So I was like, all you need to do is just tell their stories chronologically. That's all you need, because they're so powerful, and the stories, the content is so powerful, the way they're told is so powerful. So that was what I went with, and I made a rough cut, basically using that structure. And all along, I'd asked an old friend who's a filmmaker herself, Maya Darrington. I had asked her if she'd co-produce with me, and so really what I wanted to do was like look at my cuts and give back notes because she's such a good filmmaker. So she watched, an early rough cut, and she was like, they're great, but you are going to have to talk about yourself and put yourself in and like talk about Navan and give us some context around Navan. And I just thought, no, like that wouldn't work at all. I won't do that. And so then I was further down the line. I had what I thought was like quite a decent rough cut based on the characters. And then I sent it to a man called Andre Singer, who is he's a very, very experienced documentary person. He exec produced my first film, and he's more usually a producer for people like Werner Herzog. He exec produced Joshua Oppenheimer's films. So he's incredibly experienced. And so he watched my rough cut and he was really scathing. He was like, these are great and these people are great, but you have to put yourself in it. It makes no sense. You need to put that context of you and the town and what the town was and where you're from. And I was like, oh God. And so I had to go back to Maya and say, you were right. You were right months ago. And I completely overlooked what you meant. So I was really worried that because I thought it was really egotistical and was kind of whinging at both of us going, I don't really want to do an author doc. And I just think I've always like been in love with the idea of making this beautiful observational documentary, which this wouldn't have been either. But anyway, I just didn't massively want my voice in it. Anyway, in the end, I did. But I suppose I've gone for a fairly sparse voiceover. And yeah, I just see it as a way to facilitate the stories of the others and to explain what Navan is, or to explain what it was to grow up Catholic in the 1980s and the 1990s, or what kind of government you had, or what the teaching of Catholicism was. So it's really just an information providing exercise. I really did not want to talk that much about how I was feeling or like how I felt when I met Mary, stuff like that. So I think it kind of works. You know, I'm quite experienced at documentary edits. Like they're my favorite bit of documentary making. I think most people in documentary probably feel the same. It's very creative, the editing process. And so yeah, my other big problem with the edit was that we just really had no money and we didn't really have any editors for a long time. So I had to work with a brilliant person called Sinéad O'Shea, who worked with me on my first film also. But we had to we kind of edited it in like 5 weeks, but spread over 9 months. We only had enough budget to do it that way. And so that's a very difficult way to work.
And is it easier for fresh eyes if you're doing it with that much time?
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument that creatively it's a good way to do it because I would get like 2 days of Andy was going through his own very many things like COVID, car crash, you know where to live. Like it was just so terrible, so hard to get time with him, and I just kept dragging any time he had out of him. But yeah, you do 2 days and then you'd be left with that work for a month. So you'd just be like staring at it going, okay, what's needed? So yes, there is an argument that it was a very tough but probably valuable way of conducting an edit, but obviously no production producer, broadcaster in the world would advocate that as an actual working process. It's deeply impractical.
So you had mentioned that actually a good chunk had to be taken out of this. And is this what you find would be the norm about like kind of, you know, but kind of like things that deal with such big systemic issues in documentary? Would you know, the legal stuff be like actually?
Oh no, it actually wasn't that bad. We were very lucky. I'm actually quite glad to have the opportunity to discuss this because we had such a wonderful person working with us in the legal realm. So his name is Andrew Sheridan, and he does some live work. He does a lot of different kinds of work, but he just really committed himself to this film. So I would say he and I watched this film the most. You know, there were we would watch a cut of it kind of every few weeks, and he would give me some notes, and then I would just go and play with them. But you know, he was quite a creative lawyer, you know, so he even ended up like giving me notes on kind of content, you know, like we had like Norman's daughter who's brilliant, who's so lovely, but you know, like I don't know. I think you're gonna have to like put a bit of time. It was very funny. Anyway, he was just a fantastic person to have on our team where, you know, there'd be stuff that there wasn't really that much stuff that we took out really actually when I kind of come to think of it properly. It's more that we had to just really justify everything that was there legally speaking. You know, like we quote from Father Farrell's memoir, you know, for example. So, you know, you have to just back all that up. Even if you don't see it on screen, you just have to be able to support everything that you're saying and doing. But I've had far more trying legal process. I'm kind of conscious that it's touch wood.
Yeah.
Nothing will happen. But you know, it was quite straightforward in a sense because the participants are there, they're on camera, and they're saying what their experience was, what happened to them. But it's just funny because actually as legal processes go, I would go as far as to say it was quite enjoyable. I'm kind of conscious now when putting words to Andrew's mouth. No, that was actually quite tricky and annoying, but I find it very interesting.
I suppose it's a tough job, and it's like the sound guy's job as well, or sound person's job, not inferring gender. That it's like the thing where your job kicks in when there's a problem, so you don't get to do the fun stuff, like, you know, the creative building, the, you know, finding solutions. You're like, actually, sorry, you love that, we're gonna have to sort that out or get rid of it, you know, like I
know, I mean, it is sad saying goodbye to things that you really like. It's funny, we've made a TV cut down as well, and I was really dreading that, but actually it was amazing. I was able to just take huge chunks out without a backward glance.
And how was it securing rights and stuff like that, especially on that budget?
Actually is extremely painful. Really, really frustrating. So I think the most important piece of archive in the film is that NBC footage. You know, it's when the US News Channel comes to mind. It's just an incredible thing that happened. And they interview the children about the corporal punishment they've experienced. And so, you know, it was absolute gold. I'd already, you know, gotten the okay for the film before I started. I was actually doing an interview the other day with somebody and they were like, but why did you just make this a feature? This could have been like a multi-part series and possibly it could have been in retrospect and we'd all have been paid and it would have been much better. But anyway, so the archive though, you have to pay for something like that. You have to pay a lot of money. So, you know, that took up like a quarter of our whole budget. Like it was absolutely crazy how much money.
Oh my
I didn't pay
God.
myself, basically. That was how this film was made. And I worked every day on it. But so it was very expensive, but it is absolutely brilliant, that piece of footage. And then we also went to we put ads up on Facebook, or not ads, like posts on Facebook, looking for families who had lived in Navan during that era and asking if they'd like to donate any video footage, because you know any video footage pre-mobile phones is quite rare. So all of it was valuable and precious to us, and you know we really loved it. In fairness, actually, I should mention Screen Ireland gave us an uplift, as they call it, where they gave us money to convert the archive. We had bought the archive for festival use, and they wanted us to convert it to in perpetuity use. So they gave us that when the film was kind of done. But that's a bit of a gamble. But I suppose for most festival documentaries, it's enough to have it for festival use. It's quite a complex subject. I'm happy to discuss that in more detail another time.
Yeah. God, it's so tricky. But I mean, so much kind of like, because you give such context, there's so much hinges on it. And it's sort of like that burst of energy as well. Like you're giving like a whole sense of that era. Like, and some of the footage around the corporal punishment stuff was just
It's just amazing.
heartbreaking.
It's so good. See those kids all just go, I was it today, or was it like it's amazing. And you know, there's nothing that I could have written or said that would achieve the same effect.
No. And when you see Norman,
I
that was the
know,
killer. That was a
I
killer for
know.
me. I was like,
Again,
I
no
am
matter what
gone.
he says now, you know, in '60s, it is nothing compared to the experience of seeing him as a 9-year-old describe what happened to him. It's just incredible. It's brilliant. It's an amazing piece of footage.
And that's it. And that context of like these vulnerable kids that were just trying to get an education. This was the norm. And actually, I think that's one of the most shocking things watching this as a viewer, where they were like, they didn't even question it. They were like, this is just, oh yeah, you just get beaten to the living piss all the time as like
I know.
an innocent young child for like not knowing Irish.
I know. Like literally his mother said, please beat the other arm. Can you write a note for him to be beaten on the other arm? That was what she was hoping for. It wasn't that he would stop being hit.
Which is such a low bar. But it's just like, I mean, did you find was making this difficult? Like, was it difficult to listen to at times, or can you kind of divorce yourself?
I think actually I sometimes worry about myself. I think I do divorce sometimes, but then it's interesting since I had the baby in August. So I had a baby just a few weeks before it premiered, and I really actually found it very hard to watch the premiere, having watched so many edits. But you know, there's this footage basically of like babies from within mother and baby homes, and you know, their little tongues were all kind of hanging out of their mouths because they were hungry. And I was so attuned by that point to, I suppose, my own baby being hungry or not. I found it very upsetting. Because obviously that was the reality of thousands and thousands of babies, that they were hungry and they weren't being looked after. Anyway, it probably reflects very badly on me, but I'd never really made that connection, you know, between their gesture, their little tongues coming in and out of their mouths before. in that way until I sat in the cinema in Toronto watching it. It was just, it was really horrible. I found it very upsetting.
And actually, I found that when the babies were being stolen, I found that very upsetting. Like I found it, I think there's like this visceral feeling where academically, oh, that's very sad, and I feel sad for that woman. But there's this bit where you actually just, you kind of, your body feels it for a moment, where it's just much more tangible.
Yeah, it's funny. A friend of mine was watching the cinema, and she was at that piece, and then, not to spoil it, but like the outcome isn't as terrible as you think it's going to be. And she guessed when it was about to turn, and she was like, "Oh, just thank God, because I can't take this anymore." Like it's too awful. She too had just had a baby, and she was just, I can't take this. So yeah, it's funny. You have to be careful how you introduce the film, because you don't want to be too positive, but you don't want to be too negative either. It really is a mixture of both.
But so you were kind of like, it's very much so sort of almost like text that you're editing, that you can kind of, until you see it as a whole then, which probably protects you, because it would be so difficult to
I suppose I was just probably, when I was making it, I was so focused on getting it right. I was working with a composer, George Brennan, as well, and he's brilliant. Say, I think he found it nightmarish as well to work in it, because again, he just didn't have enough time or money really to pay him properly. But it kept changing as well, the final cut, like, so he'd give us a perfectly finished music, and I'd be like, actually, you've added a few more shots to that now, which kind of knocks out his structure. But yeah, no, I've got to say, I was quite cold-hearted most of that edit. I was so fixated on finishing it, and I was pregnant, and as I was saying earlier, I was really sick the whole way, and I had no one to work with. I was very alone. Like, it was quite unpleasant. The actual days of working with Enda, when I was just with Enda in the edit, they were like the best days, but everything else apart from that was really dreadful. Not as dreadful as being a mother and baby home. I'm conscious saying this, but as production experiences go, like, it was extremely arduous, and it felt quite hopeless a lot of the time.
God. And then what's there is so polished and gorgeous. Like, there's no sense of that in the final. I
know, it's like, it's strange with that. It's because it felt, I mean, when I look back, it's so embarrassing. Like, I sent a rough cut to this festival where I'd screened before, and we didn't get in, and we were like, that's weird. And then we looked at the rough cut. There was actually like a giant black hole in the middle of the cut that we'd sent. Like, that film was so rough for a really long time. Like, I don't know how it looks so much more polished now, because it really had a very, very short edit by documentary standards. I mean, it's actually not really that polished either. Like, I was talking to an American sales agent, and he's like, you've really got to work at a proper budget next time. And I was like, I certainly would like that. And he was saying, you've got to improve the look of these things. And I was like, I know, I want to.
I thought the stock footage, like there's such good kind of pacing.
There's good ideas. I suppose maybe he's talking about like the interview setups. They look very, very DIY, which they kind of were. I think there's a particular look for those big American documentaries, and this certainly is not.
Oh, like that kind of studio, like,
yeah, and the person in the middle of the frame, and they're like looking down the camera, and then there's a second camera like looking over their cheek and nose. That kind of look. I guess that's kind of partly what he was talking about. But
I much prefer seeing them in their home and chatting.
Yeah,
I don't know. I kind of feel like that's a lovely.
This film, as I say, I think this film works. But I can also see why for him it seems pretty lo-fi. I think that's what he is getting at, really.
Have you thought about like future projects? Have you said, okay, like, look, I'm sort of putting this to bed and I want to do something lighter? Is there themes that you want to go towards?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, it's funny that sales agent just mentioned, he was like, you any ideas for famous people? Any at all? And I was like, well, not really right now, but I was thinking the other day, I would love like just to, make not like a fluffy film, but just, just something that was unequivocally celebratory. This is celebratory too, but there's quite a lot of nuance to that. So that would be nice, but most of my ideas are a little bit grim, or like not entirely grim, but like they're a bit gritty, I guess, at least. So yeah, I'll have to see. I'm hoping this adventure, as pleasant and as extraordinary as it's been, will conclude in the next sort of few weeks or months at least. It'll play Sydney Film Festival next in June, and it's got a release in the UK with Dogwolf on April 19th. And it just feels like it is kind of coming to a natural end around those events. So yeah, I think this might be the end, and then I will move on. I've started a few other things too, but they're not really the kind of escapist dream that I'm actually learning. I would much prefer to do something just nice and soft for a little while.
And I presume it's the same in documentary, where it's all about securing funding. So it's like what ideas land with co-pro, or like
absolutely,
like what.
Like you really need a few projects in development. Really, I have a production company, which I always feel a bit of a fraud saying because it is me, the production company. But I have a few projects in development. So yeah, you're trying to figure, or it's not. You don't always have much agency, really. It's just what makes sense, I suppose, for a co-production or a financier, how much budget you might need. These are the things we just talk about incessantly, much more than creative things a lot of the time.
And do you is it a case of you'd have to go to like European festivals with a sales document and a pitch deck and and be ready to go when this film comes out with like your next 5 pitch decks, in case you're like, oh, you have something else? Yes, I have this. Like, do you kind of have to be prepared for these? And then while pregnant?
Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't have to do much of that with this film when I was pregnant, because it already had its financing through that micro budget scheme. And then you just email a link to the festivals. So you don't actually have to go in person to get a film into a film festival. You just fill out an application form. But to raise money for a film, yes, you do have to go to markets a lot of the time, or you have to do a lot of Zoom calls. But I'm talking about this like I'm really adept at it. I'm really not. I go to these markets. I generally don't even get into the markets, but I apply for these markets and then kind of see. I don't know. I'm much better at talking. I'm very, this might sound like false modesty. It's really not. I think I'm not reassuring to financiers. I don't think they feel very excited talking to me, really. I think interviewees like talking to me, but I think the reasons they like talking to me are the same reasons why financiers think I'm very unimpressive a lot of the time. So I think they just think I'm too small scale, I suppose, which is probably true. Anyway,
I would say they're like the most intense kind of subject matter, tackling it on like the kind of national scale right down to like that macro level. I'm like, they're big themes to tackle. I'm surely that could like translate to like another thing.
Yeah, maybe. Well, let's wait and see. I kind of hate counting chickens before they're hatched. Or
in this game, anything can fall through at any time as well, and you just never know. You're like, something is that close to starting, and then you're like, ah.
I know. I just honestly, yeah, I just hate the idea of saying this is gonna be great. That it just isn't.
This was great, and this is hitting national cinemas on the 21st of April. I thought it was absolutely fabulous. Really well done. So thank you so much for making such a lovely film.
But thank you so much for a beautiful interview. That was so kind. I've never spoken for such length. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.